Firstly, at this juncture, let me take this opportunity to commend the St. Kitts and Nevis National Commission for UNESCO in cooperation with the Brimstone Hill Fortress National Park Society, as well as the UNESCO Cluster Office for the Caribbean, for undertaking to implement this project and hosting such a timely and impressive workshop. I acknowledge with interest the high caliber of international experts on World Heritage properties present here, who will assist us in the monitoring and implementation of the proposed conservation measures for Brimstone Hill and other historic sites on St. Kitts and Nevis, as indicated by the previous speakers, in order to prevent further structural damage to and gradual processes of decay of our local heritage properties. We are therefore grateful that UNESCO is making this particular intervention at this time, particularly because the organization is seen and commended around the world as a champion for safeguarding and preserving World Heritage properties.
Essentially, this workshop was also conceptualized with the intention to raise the profile of the economic and historical value of our natural cultural heritage, and to highlight the importance of our outstanding universal value of our own World Heritage properties that most times go unnoticed amongst the vast majority of the population in this country.
The Queen of England was due to visit in 1966, February. And a few Englishmen and a few locals got together and decided that, we need to show off this fortress, and we cannot have it in the state in which it is, to show to our Queen. And so they set to work right away. One of the good things about that is that they were able to lease the hill, as it were. Our government was willing to lease the hill to the society. And that has remained basically the relationship between the management of the hill and the government. Successive governments have simply said, listen, you chaps, go ahead, manage the hill, do the restoration work that you want to do, without any interference. Two areas I think I want to emphasize, restoration and research. The society was established in order to do restoration work. At a certain point, when grants were more readily available from international agencies, we were able to do quite a bit of work. We were also able to finance experts coming down from universities and so on, to do research, archaeological research into different aspects. In recent times, we have not been able to do much of either the research or the restoration, because of lack of funds. I'm still hoping and praying that we might be able to get some of our own university students who come home on vacation during the summer to take an interest in some aspect of the hill, doing research into some particular aspect of it, so that we don't lose sight of the essential objective of the society. The thing we have to bear in mind is that we can never become complacent, because if it is one thing which the Aurelian Bastion virtual collapse has established, is that we need to be vigilant. We are dealing with structures, we are dealing with walls which are 200, 300 years old. And we live in an area which is prone to hurricanes, earthquakes, and the rest. So we need to be vigilant, and we need to do more to, as it were, monitor our situation and to be on top of it, and to do what we can to prevent any major collapse.
The presentation I'm going to give will focus a bit on this particular area, which is called the Aurelian Bastion. And the word Aurelian actually refers to an ear, all right? And so when you look at the Aurelian Bastion, you'll see that it somehow resembles, if you have a good enough imagination, shape of the air with that curve in the little piece inside here. All right, that little thing inside there. And so this is the Orleans Bastion that we speak of. The large building on it is an ordnance store. And you'll notice that there's a small structure right next to it here. That's a cistern. One of the things at Brimstone Hill that you would find is very noticeable is that during its reconstructive phase after the siege of 1782, the engineers were very careful to ensure that the fort was self-supportive in terms of not only food but especially water. And so there's a whole network of cisterns that were constructed almost at all of the various points. There's an amazing system, especially for the time, amazing system of drainage engineering that ensured that, as Sir Probin mentioned earlier, that almost every drop of water that fell on the hill was collected. So there's that cistern. And in fact, right here, you'll notice that there is what seems to be an outline. And it is. Right there, there was a hospital. Okay, according to the old maps and drawings and so on. There was a hospital there. We have the foundation there, and it's possible that later on we could do some restorative work there and do some interpretation, because that hospital, you could imagine, would have been an essential part of the functions at the hill, because soldiers and workers and everybody would have gotten sick, needed attention and so on. And therefore it's no surprise that with the hospital being in that location, that next to it would be this area right here. Those are tombstones, that's a cemetery, okay? And many of the gravestones that you see here, they are still readable and inscribed, and you can read who some of the people were. And I think I read one or two of them, and they mentioned family. So it's obvious too that some of the soldiers who lived and worked there, that they also had family, probably the officers and so on, okay, and children. In fact, I know there's at least 2 tombstones that also bear the insignia of the Freemasons. And it would therefore appear that there were some of them who were Freemasons. But I think there was a military Freemason organization, all right? And so the tombstones are marked accordingly. The particular section that is of great concern is right here. See this round end here? That's the area that is right now of great concern, that seems to be in a situation of collapse, or possible collapse, is collapsing. And just to show you how it works out here, the hospital is here, there's a route that takes you around here, and then you notice there's a gate right here, right? You then come in here, and then they take you there, and you are interred. I also believe, and I stand to be corrected, but I think I learned this from my mentor and teacher right now, still have a lot to learn, that around the whole bastion here, around the right around and on the far side, the sort of flat area surrounding it was also used as grave sites for some of the enlisted men. And so the whole area, you know, hospital and then cemetery, as the case may be. Now, the Orleans Bastion is one of the earliest structures on the hill, and therefore it's perhaps one of the oldest. Not the oldest, but perhaps one of the oldest. When we look at some of the pictures, you'll notice, for example, that a lot of the walls are constructed of a more rough, I would call it rough stonework, in the sense that the stones weren't necessarily shaped. They were like haphazard shapes of rocks that were simply put together with one another and fitted in. Whereas the later construction on the hill, especially in areas like the Citadel and so on, you'll find that much more orderly type of stone work, where the stones are cut in squares and rectangles and placed very carefully in neat rows and lines, all right? So it's a very early structure. In fact, if I go back to this picture, those of you who are from St. Kitts or who have been to the hill, you know the route that you take to the hill was not the original route up the hill, okay? In fact, the original route came up through this very valley right here and would have come up somewhere in this direction and done maybe some sort of loop to come back to this gate. So this was actually the entrance gate here to the fortifications on the hill in its early times. So a section of the wall that I just pointed out, that curved wall, is the part that's showing signs of serious instability and in need of attention. There's separation and movement within the masonry, and it appears to be worsening rapidly. And I'll show you some photos that will give an idea of how rapid that deterioration is. Collapse of this retaining wall could cause damage to the very important cemetery and other structures in and around the bastion. So if, for example, you look back at the photo, you'll realize that if this wall collapses, it could possibly damage some of these important tombstones and so on here. They can get broken, they can get buried, and so on and so on. And I believe that, as historical bits of artifacts, let's call them, it would be a sad day to lose those. All right, now here's a photo that was taken in 2014 of that section of the wall. You would see right here that there's a very serious crack. Okay. Now it is believed that these cracks and this damage was not originated by, because there's evidence that the wall had been worked on prior to those dates. See, you'll notice that there's some pointing and cement work that occurred here, okay, and over here, but none over here, because I believe they were trying to arrest some degradation in this area. But it may have continued to open. But at the same time, it appears as though an earthquake event in 2013 may have made it more pronounced. So you can see that big crack right here. And then over here, you'll notice that this only seems to be losing pointing, all right? But seems to still be fairly intact with all the stones and so on. That was 2014, 2 years ago. 2016. Right? This was taken on Sunday. That's the same crack, which seems to be opening up significantly more. That's the crack. And then remember the other piece to the right of the crack, where I said there was obviously pointing missing, but the stones were still intact. 2016. Stones have obviously fallen out on the other side. So you can see daylight through them. Not only that, you can even check out the scenery down below. All right? And you can see all here is deteriorating rapidly. Now, this is from the inside at the top of that particular wall. Let us look, for example, at what happens when you look on the outside. On the outside, this same area here, all right? This same area here, this is what it looked like in 2014 when those original photos were taken. Okay? You could see that there is a little bit of stone missing on the outside, but as we said, most of the stones were still intact and in place. Last Sunday, 2016. You can see most of the stones have fallen. And I didn't take a photo of it, but at the bottom of the wall, the fallen stones that came out. So you can see that it's happening quite rapidly. That's only 2 years. You could also see that lots of other facing stones have been removed here, and a lot of the rubble that is part of the construction for those times, because as was mentioned by somebody earlier, I don't remember who it was, I think it was Reg, that most of these walls were constructed of outer stones and rubble inside. Okay, and so you can see some of the rubble on the inside now that the stones have been removed, okay, or fallen away. That's the crack, the other crack in 2014. And you could also see here what I mentioned earlier, that there must have been some attempts at trying to arrest some degradation there. You can see the pointing is different to down here. And notice what I spoke of the loose and disorganized stones, as I call them, as compared to the rest of the fortress. Not well shaped or anything, the stones are just haphazard. Over here you could see nothing was done on the outside at least, but on the inside of it there was some work done some time ago. It seems to be extending further down, and you can see that it has widened quite a bit. This is a little further out shot, so it doesn't give the same impression of that. Here you can see further cracking and buckling of the structure. So, for example, right here, you can see where this piece of the wall is out of alignment with this piece, which means that this is like, it seems as though this is coming out, falling away. And if you look here, you will see that there's a curvature and looseness of the stones and much more cracking all along here, which tend to indicate that this area is collapsing and buckling. Back up at the top of the wall and on the inside, it is evident that, again, there were some attempts to try and fill, maybe as the wall was moving away from the infill soil that was there, that there seemed to be some attempts at putting some mortar here to fill it. But you realize that that mortar is moving with the wall away from the soil again. So you notice that the gap between here is appearing again. So the walls are moving away, which means that eventually they will move down, flat on the ground. Okay? So that is what is happening there. Here, you can see the wall again from a different angle, from the opposite side of that curve that surrounds the cemetery right here. You can see some of the tombstones in place right here. Okay, there's a gate here, and on the opposite end over here, there's another gate, which you'll see in a while. Well, it was a gate, but it's just an opening now. And so you recognize that if this wall fell, that it would do great damage. As a matter of fact, because of the shadow here, you're not able to see that there are also tombstones that are right under the wall here too, some significant ones, right? And therefore they could easily be damaged and so on. Of course, I can't help when I look at Brimstone Hill's scenery to always point out the beauty. Anybody notice that beautiful stuff over there, right? St. Kitts and the views from Brimstone Hill are what I call breathtaking, nothing short of breathtaking. Yes, and so, of course, for those of you who know, that's Nevis in the background. For those who might be foreign, that's the island of Nevis over there. From Brimstone Hill, you can see quite a number of islands. You can see Nevis in the east. You can see Statia, Sabre, St. Martin. All of those islands easily visible from Brimstone Hill. This is now back on the top of the wall and looking in the opposite direction. Remember I spoke about the other gate? That's the other gate right here. This would have led to the other gate here, which I told you would have been the original entrance to the fortress via this ravine coming up here. Okay? And so when you go through here, you'll come up on top of the area right here. And so you can see the cemetery again down below. This wall, it's only by when I observed the photos a little closer, I realized that this wall is also in dire need of some attention too. Okay? And it's not as serious as the other one, but it's showing the signs of pointing, becoming lost, and so on. Now, one of the things which we have to pay a little more attention to, and as I said, we focus more on the areas where visitation is a little more prominent. So if you look here, you'll see some of the other structures on the hill. This is the Prince of Wales Bastion. You notice how clean the walls are. This is the citadel up here, which is the main part of the fortress now, Fort George, I think it's called, and so on. The parade ground and so is to the right over here, which is not visible in the picture. But you notice there's a whole set of walls and so on all around here. And I recently understood that apparently with the hospital being down there, there were also buildings on some of these flats here that were buildings that were in support of the whole operation of the hospital down below. Things like nurses' quarters and various other support buildings for the hospital were on all of these things. So the hill was quite a big community, and lots of structures were there, but of course over time and with vandalism disappeared. You would notice that there's a big difference in how the walls appear looking down here, and the problem of course is vegetation. And I think we have to do a little more in terms of trying to control this vegetative growth, because it's very destructive, especially because some of these here, you notice that brown stuff on them, that tells you very quickly. See all these with brown? That's what we call wild tamarind. A very tough, very hard, drought-resistant plant that grows any and everywhere. And when it puts its roots anywhere, it digs deep. And it acts like a hydraulic jack. When those roots go in, as they expand, they can push anything apart, all right, including the toughest of stone. They can actually crack stone If it finds a little niche and going in, it'll crack that stone. Okay? And I don't know if any of you familiar with the plant, even when it grows in soil. You ever try pulling one up? Not a tree, you know. A little shrub that just sprouted a few weeks ago. That's maybe about 1.5 feet, 2 foot tall. Try pulling it out of the ground. Very, very hard to get out of the ground. Very, very hard. Okay? And so they take a firm hold of anything they get on, and it's hard to pull them out. Now we have some documents that were prepared for us by some of our consultants and so on. We have one, for example, called A Guide to Repair of Historic Structures in the Caribbean, which was produced by David Rawlinson in 2006. That gives a nice synopsis of, and especially in relation to Brimstone Hill, how these kind of sites are to be maintained and prepared. And this is more or less our Bible. I don't think it has been followed very closely in recent years, but I intend to change that as the new manager. I hope that we can get back to this thing. And then there was also another one, a heritage conservation plan for the Brimstone Hill Fortress National Park. This was submitted to the society in April of 2013, also by David Rawlinson, and deals specifically with Brimstone Hill, including how to repair and maintain some of these structures, including the maintenance of, and including the control of plant and plant invasion. That wild timing was mentioned in there, and how to control it, and we need to get back to doing that. So I'm hoping that within the next few months we can clear all of this and try to get these under control and so on, which might also help with some of the other walls. But we have to get back to this plan. Here, this is a closer view of that same wall I just mentioned in terms of how it looks a little, you know, battered. You could notice up here bricks, stones have fallen out, the top is rough and so on. A lot of these walls will require that we cap them, because what happens is, as rain falls in the exposed rock and rubble and limestone, it gradually weighs it away, okay, much more rapidly than it is capped to keep the water out. And I think Reg and some others might have mentioned that in their presentation too. So that's something we need to do. I think in some years ago, the far end of this wall to the right of this gate were capped and are pretty okay, but these were ignored, and therefore they're pretty much exposed and compromised. We have to get in control of that. As I mentioned before, collapse of this wall would be a serious event. Not only would it interfere with the structures below it in terms of the cemetery and probably covering other artifacts there, but at the top of the wall, the foundation for that hospital and the foundation for the magazine store, for the ordnance store, could also be compromised if that collapses. Because remember, when a hillside like that collapses, it doesn't just collapse right there and finish. With time and erosion, it continues to recede and go further and further back. Okay, and so it would need to be arrested. Damage would undoubtedly occur to the cemetery below from falling masonry, and there be the potential for significant landslip, especially if there's heavy rain. This could also affect the other structures in the area, such as the ordnance storehouse and the foundation ruins of the old hospital. As these structures are extremely significant and integral to the history and interpretation of the fortress, we are anxious to prevent their destruction. And here again is the same photo that I started out with of the Oiland Bastion. Of course, seeing something live is like a totally different thing to seeing it in photos, and so you'll get a first-hand knowledge of that. Any questions?